It's often said that big things come in small packages. That means don't underestimate something just because of its minute stature. Phantom Darkness was the perfect microcosm of that old saying. Of course, it had all the boisterous power of Dark Armed Dragon, Dark Lord Zerato, and Allure of Darkness, but buried underneath those behemoths was a tiny, zero-attack powerhouse ready to flip the metagame on its head. Welcome to another episode of This Was Actually Meta. Today we'll be visiting one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most forgotten great machine monsters, Cyber Valley, a card that proved just how valuable versatility is in this game, even if it comes completely at the cost of offense. Cyber Valley premiered as a super rare in the horrifyingly powerful Phantom Darkness booster set in February 2008. Valley was another entry in the line of incredibly strong machine monsters used by Yu-Gi-Oh! GX's Zane Truesdale or Hellkaiser Ryo. Side note, I once said on this channel that Zane used basically every good machine monster from the GX era, and this is just further proof of that. I wouldn't say that Cyber Valley was completely under the radar leading up to the release of Phantom Darkness, but it definitely wasn't a chase card in the set. Many questioned the viability of the card in what we expected to be our next dominant deck, of course being Dark Arm Return. More specifically, they questioned if it was worth your normal summon over things like E-Hero Stratos, Armageddon Knight, or Dark Grepher. As you'll soon learn in this story, Cyber Valley has always been a card that's best in the hands of duelists who think outside the box. Cyber Valley's emergence in the metagame was admittedly instant, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't met with a hefty amount of skepticism. As we all know, Dad Return was a dominant deck from the second it was released, taking up half the top 8 spots in its debut at Shonen Jump Houston 2008. However, only a single duelist of those 4 played Cyber Valley. To add fuel onto the skepticism fire, not only did that duelist, Robert Vasquez, only run 2 copies of the card in the main deck, leading many to believe that it wasn't an integral part of his strategy, but he also lost in the quarterfinals to Paul Leviton, who was running Dad Return without the card. Making it to the quarterfinals of a Shonen Jump championship of course was a great accomplishment, but the fact that the other 3 Dark Arm Return decks without Cyber Valley all won their matches in the top 8 while Vasquez lost his led the community to believe that the deck was simply better off without it. In fact, some even went as far as to say that the card's best uses were in gimmicky decks. This take was based on James Reed's Magical Explosion OTK deck that also made it to the quarterfinals of Shonen Jump Houston. Magical Explosion was of course an all or nothing deck that ideally wanted to win right after its first turn. James mained a full 3 copies of Cyber Valley in his build. Furthermore, to double down on his commitment to the card, he brought back an old favorite that had defined the previous year of 2007. James paired his triple Cyber Valley with 3 copies of Machine Duplication in the main deck. The card that had once been known solely because of Card Trooper was now working wonders with a new partner. Cyber Valley's third effect was super important to the Magical Explosion strategy, as it could be used to place a copy of Magical Explosion back on the top of your deck if it was lost to Reasoning or Monster Gate, just like the spell A Feather of Phoenix, which the deck also ran. This meant not only could you recover a lost copy of Magical Explosion, but then you'd be able to use the other 2 Cyber Valleys to instantly draw it and another card. Cyber Valley being level 1 also made it incredibly ideal for any deck using Reasoning because it was very unlikely that your opponent would call that level. Even in the event where a Magical Explosion duelist didn't have the greatest opening, Valley was still a very solid play. Unless you committed to monster removal, the first effect would be excellent as a failsafe to stop them from being killed and give them an extra draw, putting them closer to their win condition. Lastly, Cyber Valley's lack of offense meant absolutely nothing to a deck like Magical Explosion, as it never obviously needed to attack to win, so there really wasn't a downside even from that aspect. For all those reasons and more, Cyber Valley was the perfect fit in a deck like Explosion, but the Dad Return players simply weren't convinced. They didn't use cards like Reasoning or Monster Gate that could work around having to commit your normal summon to Valley. They also would never be given the opportunity to have 3 copies of the card hit the field in a single turn with no machine duplication. In addition, Dad Return was a deck that won through attacking, so Cyber Valley being the only monster in the deck that couldn't do damage was pretty noticeable. At the following Shonen Jump Costa Mesa, Cyber Valley had an incredibly lackluster performance and didn't build much confidence in the Dad Return players. It saw an incredibly disappointing 0 duelists in the top 8 playing the card. But fear not, its major assertion into the metagame was just around the corner. The real breakthrough for Cyber Valley came at the following event, Shonen Jump Columbus. If you're unaware of the horror that was this event, I previously dedicated an entire Yu-Gi-Oh story to this Shonen Jump titled Darker Than Black. The cliff notes are, this event was dominated by FTK decks, with 3 of them making it into the top 8. The top 8 Magical Explosion OTK deck from Houston was dropped for Toon Cannon Soldier FTKs and the dreaded Shadow Priestess of Ohm FTK. Why give your opponent a draw phase when you don't have to? When the dust all settled and the top 8 duelists emerged, we had a very interesting scenario. Once again, only one Dark Arm duelist was using Cyber Valley in the main deck, and on the other side of the bracket we had another all or nothing FTK deck that was also using the card. Our dead return player was the well-known top-level duelist and deck builder, Jerry Wang. Wang decided to up the ante and use a full playset of Valleys. Having his finger on the pulse of the meta, Wang saw very clearly from the events of Houston that the metagame was speeding up at a tremendous pace, and that Cyber Valley would give him access to more options, whether they be better or worse than the standard E-Hero Stratos normal summon. Wang also proved how useful the card could be in Dark Arm Dragon decks, and while Paul McCann's Cyber Valley powered Cannon Soldier FTK flamed out in the top 8, Jerry Wang made it to the finals. In the finals of Columbus, Jerry Wang and Aaron Diaz, who brought his Kaiba Control or Shadow Priestess of Ohm FTK, had the dueling world's attention. Wang did not disappoint and showed the community just how versatile and impactful Cyber Valley could be. In Game 1, Wang opened with Allure of Darkness, banishing Dark Grepher. He then normal summoned Cyber Valley and banished it alongside Card Trooper in his hand to put the Allure of Darkness back on the top of his deck. Following this, he activated Dimension Fusion to bring back all 3 monsters. This not only allowed Wang to get his Destiny Hero Malicious in his graveyard by the way of Dark Grepher, but he also drew 2 additional cards with Cyber Valley's effect. In the end, after going through about 20 cards in his deck in his first turn, he was finally able to dig for the all-powerful Crush Card Virus, which decimated Aaron Diaz's opening hand. I personally believe that it was this moment that sold the broader community on the power and versatility of Cyber Valley. In that duel, Wang knew that there was only a single card in his entire deck that could beat Diaz's Kaiba Control, and Cyber Valley started the process of him getting to it. Had Wang opened with Elemental Hero Stratos rather than Cyber Valley, he would have normal summoned it in search for a D-Hero monster, then activated the Allure of Darkness, just hoping for the best. But Valley not only let him stack his Allure on top of his deck so that he could draw it again and use it afterwards, it also perfectly synergized with the best and most important card of the format, Dimension Fusion. In fact, during the side decking process in between games 1 and 2, Jerry Wang even said to Aaron Diaz in a friendly tone, quote, "It was because of Cyber Valley that you lost," end quote. To further prove Wang's point, in an ironic turn of events during Game 3, which was the only game of the weekend where Diaz bricked, Wang once again opened the duel up by normal summoning Cyber Valley. When Diaz attacked into it on his first turn with Dark Grepher, it let Wang draw Destiny Hero Malicious, which made his double Destiny draw on hand live and allowed him to use Crush Card for a second time in the match, thus winning the duel. As the finals played out, the Yu-Gi-Oh community could only sit back and watch in awe, as in both duels that Wang won during the finals, Cyber Valley was the catalyst to victory. After this, Cyber Valley's popularity absolutely exploded. At the next Shonen Jump Championship in Minneapolis, half the duelists in the top 8 were playing 3 copies of the card in the main deck. For the remainder of the format, Cyber Valley essentially became a mainstay in the Dark Arm strategy, and even after the Phantom Darkness emergence ban list that banned Dimension Fusion, Cyber Valley's place remained largely unchanged in the meta. When the format ended and the deck transitioned to the iconic Teledad variant, there were many players who continued to use the card. However, as solid as Cyber Valley may have been in Teledad, it was far superior in the Synchro Cat deck in the following format of March 2009. While I personally believe that Valley could be a little bit clunky in Teledad, that was definitely not an issue for Cat. For starters, Synchro Cat could easily incorporate high impact but potentially dead power spells like Machine Duplication. If you had Duplication plus Cyber Valley, then great, your hand was obviously very powerful, but even if you didn't, you always had the option of discarding it for something like Summoner Monk. Secondly, Synchro Cat often played Mind Control, which wasn't just useful for stealing Synchro fodder or flip monsters, but was great in conjunction with Cyber Valley's second effect: steal your opponent's monster and then banish both monsters to draw 2 cards. After 2009, Cyber Valley's popularity fell off a precipitous cliff, and I can't point exactly to one reason why. In early 2010, Synchro Cat started evolving and was still having a relatively successful run. Even with Mind Control moving to limited status, Brain Control was still legal, so there were multiple ways of taking your opponent's monsters. I think Duelist just felt like it wasn't consistent enough. In April 2010, at Shonen Jump Edison, Cyber Valley would basically have its final hurrah moment, as Shiraz Cerebian would make it all the way to the semifinals using the card in its Quick Draw Plant variant. In theory, the card worked well on the deck. Not only did the deck amass tokens like crazy thanks to Dandelion, but those tokens of course could be banished to draw more cards using Cyber Valley. This deck also ran defensive battle traps in the form of hand traps like Gores and Battle Fader, which were perfect cards to draw into for Cyber Valley, or could also serve as fodder if you summoned them prior to Cyber Valley hitting the field. In the end, maybe Cyber Valley fell out of favor because drawing 2 cards became progressively easier. Maybe it fell out of favor because summoning banished monsters got incredibly harder, or maybe players just stopped believing that it would survive until the battle phase for its first effect. Regardless, that doesn't erase how much of an impact the card had for multiple years in the metagame, and how good the card is, in my opinion, still to this day. And with that, we are at the conclusion of our story. I thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, or more importantly, if you learned something, give the video a thumbs up, and stay tuned to this channel for more videos just like this.